I continued down the hallway, passing by corridors that contained many dead ends, until I found myself in yet another hallway. Those damn ships were so confusing. I still don't know how the Covenant ever got around in them. With a whole lot of luck, trial and error, and nearly getting caught, I finally made my way to what was a control room. As I stand at the doorway, I quickly survey the room, then back up so the door closes. This room was the same size as the two-story room, just without the second floor. 10 somewhat diamond-shaped pillars penetrate from ceiling to floor in the room. The 2 in the front of me, 3 on the left side of the room, and 3 on the right, and 2 towards the back wall. The pillars were all placed about 5 feet from their respective wall and about 10 feet from each other, along with being able to hide one of me widthwise and about 1.5 of me lengthwise. A wall to my right with 2 locked doors on either end, along with a door straight across from me. Lastly, a ramp going up to a square platform, along with a ramp going below the platform. I counted 4 elites, 2 blue ones at the back talking, 1 golden one standing on the main platform manning a big hologram display, and 1 below the main platform talking to the golden elite. So, I want to get to that display, but how to get rid of the elites? First, I'm going to need a distraction. Right then, I had the perfect idea. I took the door I entered through and jammed it so it would make that really annoying chime over and over, then moved to the first pillar in front of me. The Golden Elite got fed up with the sound after about 10 seconds and sent the 2 elites to investigate, then turned back around to look at the display. They both moved from the back of the room to the left of the room and then to the jammed door. When they were in a blind spot, I moved to the next pillar on my right. Then the first pillar on the right side of the room. I peeked around the right side of the pillar at the Golden Elite, and right then it looked to its left at a different part of the display. I knew this was my only chance to move, so I got greedy and I moved all the way down to the third pillar. It was still looking left, and had ceased communication with the elite below it. The blue elite still hadn't unjammed the door by this point, so the golden elite turned around to scold them. As it was presumably cursing the other elites out in their native language, I took this opportunity to go down the ramp below the main structure. This elite was purple and working on a smaller hologram display. I had successfully snuck up behind the purple elite and only had one quick option to kill it without making a noise. So I snapped its neck so fast it didn't even make a sound when it died, and proceeded to lay the body down as quiet as possible. I noticed another sticky grenade attached to its right hip, so I took it, giving me a complete set of 2. By this point, the Golden Elite had finished the scolding and turned back around to look at the display. I'm standing right where the beginning of the upper ramp would be. I'm able to climb up the left side of the wall of the lower ramp and back up to the main floor undetected. I quickly sneak behind the second pillar on the right side of the room and evaluate the room. The blue elites have got the door unjammed to the point that the chime has stopped, but the door isn't fully closed. I really did a number on that door, apparently. One of the blue elites is on the other side of the door in the hallway, looking in my general direction while talking to his buddy. I peek back behind the pillar and have to wait a few minutes. I take a deep breath in and release out quietly. I peek back around the left side of the pillar, and the elite is no longer looking in my direction and is instead behind part of the door. I move to the first pillar on the right side of the room, then back to the second pillar at the front of the room. And this is it. I've only got one shot at this. I walk up to the first pillar, sitting at the back of it, and activate both sticky grenades. I peek around the left side of the pillar, throw the grenade in my left hand first, then the one in my right. By the time they realized where the grenades had come from, they both exploded in a blaze of blue light and plasma. I stayed hidden behind the back end of the pillar. The Golden Elite turned around to see the blue light of plasma dispersing in the air, and watching as the jammed door slammed shut. It then quickly turned back to the display and locked the two doors on either end of the room, and called to the elite below it. Of course, it received no response. Why it didn't just call for reinforcements would end up being a mistake. It shouted in the same language from before, and the room fell silent. It then shouted in perfect English.
Come out here, so that I may gut you, and hang you by your entrails.
I was stunned, but still wasn't going to respond. The elite began to move down the ramp as I heard its hooves clumping down the ramp. It would stomp once as to try to spook me. When it reached the bottom of the ramp and put its left hoof on the main floor, it would stomp again with its right hoof. I wouldn't break cover until it passed in front of the pillar I'm hiding behind and moved towards the blue elite bodies. I moved along the length of the pillar and peeked around the right side. The Golden Elite knelt down to inspect the mangled bodies, and I moved in. I sneak up behind him, then with my left hand grab his shoulder, pushing the elite down. I take the sword off my right thigh and into my right hand and activate it, lunging the sword into the elite's back. Its shielding is far stronger than any of the elites I had previously encountered, though. Right when I'm able to break its shields, it gets its footing and is able to backswing with its left arm, making me lose my grip. With a back fist hitting me across my helmet, I stumble off to the right. I shake off the hit and take a good look at the Golden Elite standing up. The elite looks at me and simply says,
A human.
with a bright hexagonal pattern covering its body for a brief moment. The elite's armor shielding proceeded to regenerate. It then says,
How's about we fight on equal footing? Come, human. Fight me with honor.
and deactivated its armor's shielding, surprising me for a moment. This would be my first introduction into the elite's traditions, but certainly not the last. Traditions I myself would come to honor in time. The elite took stance with its sword, holding it in front of itself and in its right hand. It then proceeded to put its left hand over its right forearm. Out of respect, I would take the same stance, but put my sword in my left hand instead of the right. We would go blow for blow, never missing a beat. We swung perfectly in time with each other. Our skills and training somehow perfectly matched. We were locked in a fatal dance. A strange feeling fell over me during that duel, as if we weren't enemies after all, but two allies training. Neither of us were attacking each other out of hate, but out of a sense of duty. came to the point where both our swords lost their last bits of charge at the same time. We were mere feet apart, but both of us looked at our swords, then looked at each other. The elite then gave a good chuckle, and I simply smiled behind my helmet. Then began the hand-to-hand combat. The elite bombarded me with jabs and punches. I played defensive at first, absorbing all the blows. The elite then threw a big left hook, but I grabbed his arm, placed my back against his chest, and flipped him over me. The elite slammed against the floor and grunted in pain. I then winded up for a punch, throwing it straight down towards the elite's head. My fist slams into the floor, denting it, to the elite rolling to the left. The elite stands, and as I'm about to stand, it throws a right cross this time. I block it with my forearm and lunge up with my left fist, uppercutting the elite in the mouth. With its bell rung, it stumbles backwards, dazed and confused. I take this opening to get in multiple jabs to the elite's torso, crushing its armor and breaking some ribs. The elite puts its hands together, raising them up and throwing them straight down towards my head. I notice at the last second, raise my hands up, grabbing the elite's forearms. The move was too strong for me to fully take, and I dropped to one knee while holding its forearms in place, right above my head. The elite then lifts up its legs and kicks me in the chest, sending me across the room. I got the absolute wind knocked out of me, and was real slow to get back up. As I'm on all fours, I see the elite in far worse shape, as it held its ribs with its right hand, the blood seeping from parts of its armor and spilling from its mouth. It slowly began to move towards me in a weak hobble. I get to being on one knee and push up to standing position, letting my arms swing freely as I look towards the elite. I briefly heard banging on the door behind me, but I raised my fists, ready to fight some more. But the elite didn't raise its fists. As it was still grabbing its ribs, and it now stood directly in front of me, all it did was raise its hand to meet my shoulder. It put its hand upon my shoulder, looked at me, and simply said,
Thank you, human, for a worthy fight.
The elite stumbled to its knees, and I caught the elite mid-fall to the floor. I then laid it on its back and made my visor see-through so it could truly look into my eyes. The elite then smiled as it looked at me and held my right arm. It looked up at the ceiling, and a pool of blood began to fill the floor. The elite fell still, finally dead from its wounds. I stood up, looking down at the elite, switched my visor back, and walked over to where we had dropped our swords. I picked up the one from the golden elite and put it on my right thigh. Now, it was just a matter of getting out of this room and destroying this ship. I approached the main structure with the holograms the golden elite seemed to favor, and I had no idea what any of it said. So, I just started pressing buttons. What was the worst that could happen? I see some sort of surveillance cameras pop up on one of the holograms. I noticed the cameras were somewhat dark. Then I looked closer and saw little round lights in the darkness. I looked at another angle and saw the planet I was on, except the angle was from space? Was this a recording? Oh no. We aren't on planet anymore. They'd taken off while I was walking about the ship. I hadn't even felt it. And it had to have happened after I passed the hangar bay because we were still on world. My armor seal wasn't damaged, so I could definitely scuttle the ship and be safe out in space for a little bit, if I had no other options. I continue to press more symbols on the hologram, and one big red symbol pops up. Well, of course, I'm going to press it. I pressed the symbol, and immediately all the doors turned green again. That solved one problem. I pressed a bunch of symbols in succession, and all of a sudden an alarm began to blare throughout the ship, and symbols began to move on the hologram. I see a grunt run from one door to the other, screaming its head off and flailing its arms in the air. I guess that's my cue to leave. I smash the console projecting the holograms and make my way back towards the hangar bay. Before I fully left the control room, I looked at the Golden Elite one last time and noticed a red Elite examining its body, given it died near the far side door. As I'm running out, it looks at me and begins to chase after me. As I'm running through the hallways, I can begin to feel the ship shake. Well, the ship's not exploding in some crazy self-destruction sequence, so that's a good sign. Also behind me is a very angry mob beginning to form. I am full sprint down the hallway to the hangar bay, jumping over a grunt that's in my way. I ran into a separate cargo bay and used the stack boxes as stairs to quickly get back up to the second floor and continue down more hallways. As I'm about to reach the door to enter the hangar bay, the ship splits right in front of me. I quickly stop dead in my tracks, nearly falling through the shielding that was activated. I activate my armor seal, then I see the hangar bay floating off into space. Now with the mobs still following me and a splitting ship in front of me, I don't have very many options. So I take a few steps back, plant my right foot, and sprint jump up and forward out of the doorway. I aim towards the hangar bay section, but the way it's sectioned off, what would be the roof of the section, is beginning to slowly tilt away from me, while moving further down and away towards the planet. I activate my boosters for a second to get me closer to the hangar bay. I lean forward while activating my magnetic boots and stick to the roof of this section of the ship. I look back at the mob of aliens, stopped at the shield door. The shielding is see-through, like the ones from the holding cells, but is keeping anything from being sucked into the vacuum of space. There's a red elite at the front of the pack who looks furious. I wave at the elite in a mocking manner, and it proceeds to grab the grunt to its right by the neck and throw it out of the shielding and into space in its anger. I would like to take this time to go on a little bit of a side tangent. I would later find out more about that elite that threw the grunt out of the airlock. After the Human Covenant War had ended, when the humans and elites became allies, there was an abundance of information that we traded. I learned that Red Elite was named Sessa Refimi, better known as the Heretic, who died by the Arbiter's hands. He'd survived our initial encounter and had been trying to hunt me down under the command of others with no results. His commanders and fellow elites would mock him for thinking a human could take out one of their ships so easily. It wasn't until he was placed under the Arbiter, when the Arbiter was a ship commander, that he would finally quit his obsession with me. Though still honor-bound and reminded of his goal, this was the seed that would later turn him into a so-called heretic. Now, back on track. As the section I'm attached to is still slowly tilting forward, moving towards the planet, I lose sight of the mob of enemies. I then activate my suit's distress beacon in hopes that Echo 315 or the Asunder would see it. I also attempt to contact the Asunder and my pilot again over a secure channel. Still nothing. I began to move towards the opening of the hangar bay, as I know I won't last long out in space. I reach the edge of the section and look over to see the plasma shielding leading to the hangar bay. As I'm about to step over the edge and onto the midway point between the ceiling and the roof of the ship, the entire ship sections off, splitting into a dozen pieces. I lose my footing and begin to float off into space. I activate my armor's boosters to stabilize myself and stop moving so I can get my bearings. The front half of the ship was completely scuttled, pieces floating off in different directions and bodies of aliens floating out of those pieces. The other half of the ship was completely intact, and I could attempt to reattach myself, but I would just be facing an army of enemies with nowhere to go. I call to the Asunder again, but all I hear is static. What was I to do? I needed a plan fast, but I can't think of anything else to do. So there I am, floating in the void. So quiet, so peaceful. My mind begins to drift again.